Welcome to the Information Security Forum podcast. I'm your host, Tavia Gilbert, and I'm in the studio with ISF Managing Director Steve Durbin. Today, we're talking about the roles of the CISO and CEO around cybersecurity, how cybersecurity can enable growth and innovation within an organization, creating a top-down culture of cyber resilience, and more. Steve, cybersecurity is often viewed as a technology issue, but are there risks to leaving it squarely on the shoulders of the CIO, no matter how capable he or she may be?
I think there are. I think that when we look at cybersecurity today, it isn't just a technology issue. It is much bigger than that. You know, cyber is pretty much integrated across all of an enterprise. There isn't anything that most departments in a business won't get up to that doesn't touch cyber in some way, shape or form. And I think by leaving it all on the shoulders of the CIO, we really forget that a key component in all of this, in the management of risk particularly, is the human element. And to manage cyber effectively across the enterprise, I think we need to be engaging far better with all of the key business leaders, with certainly the boardroom, and of course employees, irrespective of where they happen to work. And so to then give that over to the CIO, whose job, let's face it, is to focus on the technology elements, I think is to leave a lot of the cyber issues really going begging.
You talk often about how everybody involved in a business is responsible for cybersecurity, that it's not just one person or one office, it's everybody. How would you define the CEO's role in cybersecurity? If that's true, if everybody is involved in maintaining cybersecurity best practices, then what is the definition of the CEO's particular role?
I don't think we're there today, but I think that the role definition, if you like, of the CEO is that of the team lead, the captain of the team. You know, it's the person who really has to make the calls once the game has started. And you can do as much training, you can pick the right people. Ultimately, once you get out there on the field, things will change. And so the CEO's job is to make sure that he or she can coordinate the response to the way in which cyber is unfolding, perhaps to some of the attacks that might be coming in come the day that there is a breach. His or her job is to make sure that people are prepared. So it's about making sure that they've got the right skill sets across the enterprise, that the right level of training is being provided, that the right ethos, culture, is prevalent across the business as well, that says that cyber isn't something that you can hand off to other people. Everybody is responsible in some way, shape or form for managing cyber security. And really, I think that organizations that are able to point to a higher degree of effectiveness in this space really point to the fact that their CEO is engaged, does understand, and is actively involved. The other thing, of course, that the CEO is there to do is to explain some of these issues to the board. Ultimately, of course, the CEO reports into the board, and there is a very valuable role for him or her to play in explaining why the business might be operating in the way that it is when it comes down to cyber. Because inevitably, when you look at the way in which risk is managed across a business relating to cyber, it will have implications in terms of either potential financial loss or indeed cost of applying additional resources to try to prevent a breach or a hack taking place. And again, you know, having a CEO that really understands all of that, is able to articulate it in the boardroom, as well as making it happen across the business, that really is the ideal.
Mm-hmm. So again, as we've said so many times, cybersecurity cannot be viewed by a successful CEO as a separate, unrelated need. It has to be integrated throughout, as you said, the culture of the business itself.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Tavia. You know, there isn't a business today that isn't cyber-enabled in some way, shape or form. You know, I keep saying this. And if that is true, and I've no reason to suspect it isn't, then we need to change the way in which we manage our resources in that kind of environment. And what we are doing is we're planning for a day when things will go wrong. We know that they will. Mm-hmm. You know, we've moved well beyond if there is a breach.
Right.
It really is a case of when. And so given that we know some of these things are going to happen, we have to be prepared at each and every level across the enterprise. And it's not about pointing fingers and trying to adopt a blame culture. It's about saying one of the facts of operating today in a cyber-enabled environment is that things will go wrong. So given that that's the situation, how can we best put off that day, and how can we best prepare ourselves to respond to that in a way that maintains provision of service, maintains integrity of our data, the confidentiality and availability of it, maintains the trust of our employees, of our customers, of our third parties that are engaged with us, and of course preserves shareholder value.
Mm-hmm.
If we look at it from that perspective, then there wouldn't be any shortage of effort that was being expended in terms of making sure that we were doing as much as we could across the organization.
Right. Instead of an answer being, that's not a good investment or it's not something that we can afford, a business cannot afford to not invest.
No, that's right. But I think as well that there is an interesting point in this, and that is that no one is going to write an open check for this kind of thing. And so the people that really understand cyber, the Chief Information Security Officers, the CIO, and others who are involved in all of that from an enablement perspective, they also have a duty to be able to articulate some of these things in a way that the business can understand. They have a duty to articulate it in a way that investment can be quantified so that risk can be assessed. Because this is just, for me now, another business component. You know, how much are you going to spend on marketing this year? Well, what's the return I can expect? How much are you going to be spending on cyber this year? Well, what's the kind of return I can expect? Those are the sorts of habitual questions that we should be now asking as we put together budgets. And we should be monitoring and checking and measuring those on a quarterly basis.
Mm-hmm. You've called cybersecurity a growth enabler. So do you think enough organizations are including cybersecurity as part of their business strategy? Are they looking at it in the way you just described?
I think we're getting there. You know, if you look at some of the very large organizations that are hugely dependent on cyber for customer outreach, for systems enablement and so on, then yes, they do get it. It is part of the business strategy. I think for some of the other organizations, perhaps that might be smaller or are coming to cyber from a slightly different perspective or from a business angle, you know, they're not there yet. I think that over a period of time, though, it will be recognised in that particular area. So is there first mover advantage? I would say yes. I think we've moved beyond the days now when cyber, you know, a good cybersecurity posture wasn't a competitive advantage. I think it is now. I think that we've moved to that point. And I think that we're starting to see that in terms of some of the way in which organisations are bringing new product to market, are really talking about the way in which they protect data.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the less apparent impacts of security breach beyond the impact on the brand or the operations in the short term, on a culture of innovation, optimism for new initiatives, etc.?
I think there is always a concern, a fear, call it what you will, that a breach may cause an organisation to reassess whether or not it ought to have been doing something. Now, on the one hand, that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that we also need to be coming at this from the standpoint that says, if there is a degree of inevitability, what are the things that we absolutely have to do to get ourselves back up and running, to really be able to look, I think, our employees, our shareholders, our customers in the eye and say, you know, we did all that was reasonably possible, whilst also making sure that we could continue to innovate and to drive forward and to deliver across the business strategy. That is challenging because we're all human and there is a natural reaction. If you put your hand into a flame and it gets burnt, you probably won't do it again.
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't be viewing a cyber breach in the same way. We should be learning from what has happened there, but we also have to recognise that it shouldn't prevent us from pushing forward. And I think there is a concern or a danger that, you know, it might slow down innovation in certain areas of an organisation. But what we also have to be aware of is that we can't recklessly introduce innovation without consideration for the cyber implications.
Mm-hmm.
We can no longer live in an environment where we can retrofit security because something has gone wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the days when we could put code out there and use the user experience as a means of making it better no longer apply in the cyber environment. We have to get it as right as possible when it goes out there, and then we have to keep improving it, and we have to keep making sure that our defences are solid. Does that stifle innovation? No, I don't think it does. I think it brings a different slant to innovation. But really, I look forward to the day when security is actually hardwired into some of the innovation that we're starting to see. And we've moved completely beyond this retrofitting of it when things go wrong.
And are you seeing that? Do you feel that that is a sea change, that innovation and security are going hand in hand more often?
I think that in certain areas, yes. I think that all too often, unfortunately, certainly if we look at it from the consumer standpoint, there is a reluctance on the part of the consumers, and I completely understand it, to pay more for security.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody goes into a mobile phone shop and says, give me the most secure device that's available.
Mm-hmm.
You will go in and you will say, I want the best camera, I want the best user experience, I want, whatever it might be. Security won't even figure on your top 10 list or top 20 list in most cases. And so therefore, if you're producing a consumer product, why would you introduce it? Because it will only increase the cost and could, in the worst case, of course, encourage people perhaps not to buy your product. So we still have to fight against that. But at the same time, I think that there is an increased realization of the responsibility of the manufacturer of a device, for instance, or indeed of a provider of a service, to ensure the integrity and the confidentiality of data that it is handling. Certainly if we're talking about personally identifiable information, then the General Data Protection Regulation and other regulations around the world, such as what we've got in California, for instance, over in the United States, has really cemented that. And I think those are some of the shifts that we're starting to see in different organizations that are providing product and service today.
What are some of the top-down culture changes that you think need to be implemented in order to create what you've called a cyber-resilient culture?
I think that cyber security, cyber best practice, cyber resilience, we can call it a number of different things. They all have to stem from the top of the organization. So if your chief executive refuses, for instance, to password protect his or her mobile phone, that really doesn't send the right message in terms of how important you view security across the enterprise. Mm-hmm. And it begins there. If you have senior departmental leaders who will step away from a desk in an open office, for instance, and leave screens alive, mm-hmm. It's no different from in the past when you used to leave papers lying around. Mm-hmm. And so I think that there is a culture of security that we need to embed across the enterprise that really says, there is a different way of doing things. We are concerned about how we protect information. We're concerned about how it is used. We think before we click on attachments. Mm-hmm. We think before we go and access different sites. But that requires you to know who to go to ask for advice. And so this continuous training component, I think, is also fundamental across an organization. It isn't a case of just sort of, doing it once and then leaving it, or maybe providing a refresher. So when I talk about cyber being integral in an organization, it is all of those components. It's the way in which, yes, our systems are developed with security in mind. It's the way in which our people behave in terms of accessing systems with security in mind. And it's about providing a coaching environment that really helps people to behave in the right kind of way. And then we have to look at what happens when things go wrong. And that's about continually improving as well and communicating those things so that everybody understands, because there will be a breach at some point in time and everybody will be affected by it. And so we need to understand what the right way of behaving might be.
So just one final point of clarification. It's not just the CEO, although that's the top-down level that this culture is driven from, but it's also the CHRO, it's also the CIO. Do you feel that the CEO is the most important component, or is there an equal weight or that influence coming from one area more than another?
I think cyber security is a team game, and every employee has a role to play in that team. Different people will be good at different elements, but ultimately we're all playing on the same side, or should be. And so we can't offload responsibility to one particular area. We can't offload, the responsibility for ensuring the integrity of data to the CISO, for instance. He or she has to have other people working with them who are able to do that, and they have to be assured that the end users to understand the importance of some of that information. So I think that all of this leads to quite a significant change in the way in which organizations operate, in terms of the way in which they communicate, and indeed the way in which they view cyber across the enterprise. But the short answer is that there is no one individual who is responsible across the organization. Everybody is.
Thank you, Steve, for sharing your insight on how individuals can understand their role within an organization to help create a culture of cybersecurity and cyber resilience. For more resources for CEOs, CISOs, and anyone else looking to enhance the security of their business, please visit securityforum.org. And listeners, we'd really like to hear from you. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover or someone you'd like us to interview, get in touch through our website or tweet us at Security Forum. And we'll be back soon with another episode. In the meantime, please rate and review us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps listeners find us. We'll be back with you soon. Thanks so much for listening.